What happens when an IPS officer goes undercover in a women's prison? Based on true injustice. A poor widow is assaulted in prison, but what no one expected, she's actually a high-ranking undercover police officer on a secret mission. What happened next? Who gets unmasked? And will justice truly prevail? If you want to know the truth hidden behind the prison walls, watch this video until the end. She walked in just like hundreds of women before her, head bowed, wearing a faded white sari, sun-worn face, and eyes lowered as if afraid of being seen. No one knew her real name. The guards simply called her by a cold, impersonal term, new inmate. But they were wrong. They couldn't see the fire quietly smoldering behind those eyes. She was Radha Mishra, a senior officer in the state police force, a true IPS officer. But today, that identity was buried. She had become Savitri, a widowed woman falsely accused of theft. Her mission, to uncover the dark secrets of Prison Block 4, a place where whispers of abuse, rape, and torture against women were buried under layers of silence and concrete. No one knew the truth. No one, except her and a cover team of investigators silently tracking her every move. Strangely, a woman as powerful as Radha had to play the role of the weak to uncover the truth. But that's the irony of justice. To drag darkness into the light, you sometimes have to walk straight into it. It all started with an anonymous letter. No sender. No signature. Just a blurry clip, enough to pierce Radha's heart. A woman being raped in an interrogation room. The perpetrator? A junior officer. His face wasn't visible, but the way he smirked, half mocking, half possessive, kept Radha awake for many nights. She knew, if an official investigation was launched, all evidence would vanish before the truth could emerge. The only way was to become the prey herself, but a prey that carried a hidden blade. Radha entered the prison on a gloomy morning. The sky itself felt like a warning. She was escorted by 2 undercover officers. Her new name, Savitri Devi, charged with stealing a necklace from a wealthy estate. The case was crafted flawlessly, real enough to avoid suspicion, minor enough to escape media attention. As the prison doors slammed shut behind her, a shiver ran through her spine. The smell wasn't just mold, it was the scent of trapped dreams and unanswered screams. Eyes stared through iron bars, silent, lifeless. She entered without a word. No one cared. To them, she was just fresh meat. But someone noticed, and noticed closely. He ran the women's ward. His name, Dariga Mahipal, a man in his 40s with narrow eyes and a smile as cold as steel. He didn't beat women. He lured them, preyed on them with words and glances, pushing them down without ever raising his hand. The moment Radha walked in, his gaze sliced across her like a knife. He didn't know she was an officer. He thought she was just another dumb widow. And that was his first mistake, the first of many he would pay for. 3 days passed. Radha barely spoke. She observed. Each night, she scribbled on scraps of paper hidden in her clothing, shift changes, guard names, suspicious behavior. Every woman bore scars, some on their skin, others on their souls. Then came the night of reckoning. Mahipal summoned her to a private interrogation room. He smiled, poured her tea, a scene that looked polite, but his eyes were dripping with sinister intent. Savitri Devi, right? Feeling lonely here? If you need protection, just say the word. Radha didn't respond. She bowed her head. His eyes gleamed like a predator catching a scent of blood. He stood, moved behind her, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "A woman like you, so beautiful, what a waste in a place like this." Radha clenched her fists, rage boiling inside. But she had to wait. Reacting now would ruin everything. She trembled and whispered, "I just want to live quietly. I don't know anyone here." He chuckled softly. "Good. Let me take care of you." Radha left the room with her heart pounding. He had taken the bait. But this was only the beginning. She needed proof, evidence that could be recorded, heard, and couldn't be denied. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Do you want to know how Radha exposes this predator in uniform? Will she be in danger? What horrifying truths will be revealed? Comment the number 2 below to let me know you're here, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I suggest you do and turn on the bell so you don't miss a single episode. Your support helps us keep creating powerful stories to inform and inspire. That night, back in her cell, Radha said nothing. The other inmates eyed her curiously, but stayed silent. In this place, everyone knew one rule: silence is survival. But within Radha, a fire had been lit, a vow to expose evil, no matter the cost. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But she lay awake the entire night on a torn mat, eyes fixed on a stained ceiling. A part of her wanted to strike now, reveal her IPS badge and throw Mahipal into prison. But she knew, if she acted too soon, everything would be buried. He would erase the evidence, mock the system, and continue crushing vulnerable women. She didn't come for revenge. She came for truth and justice, for everyone. The next morning, Radha quietly walked to the laundry area, a place where female inmates whispered things too dangerous to say aloud. She approached an older woman named Shanta. Her eyes were cloudy, but filled with a lifetime of pain. "How long have you been here?" Radha asked softly. Shanta didn't look up. She scrubbed a shirt with calloused hands and whispered, 10 years. 10 years in hell. I killed my husband because he murdered our daughter and got away with it. Is there justice here?" Radha's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to say, "Yes. And I'll bring it to you." But she had to stay undercover. She slowly gained the women's trust, with compassion, with patience. And little by little, the horror stories surfaced like shards in the mud. Nights where no one dared say no. Threats of solitary for non-compliance. Bruised arms. Sleepless nights haunted by silent sobs. Radha knew, it was time to act, fast. That night, she slipped into a dark corner behind the mess hall, no cameras, weak signal. She knocked 3 times, a coded signal to the external investigative team. A hidden micro-camera was embedded in the prayer book she carried. What everyone thought was a grieving widow's talisman was actually a spy eye. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the device, "I'll make him show his true face. Be ready." The next day, Mahipal summoned her again. "Savitri Devi, I need to clarify a few details about your case." Radha had heard those words in countless assault reports, a classic trap. She got up. Her legs trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what was to come. This would be the final confrontation. If she failed, no one would know the truth. Mahipal shut the door, poured water, smiled. "So, how are you adjusting? Feeling more comfortable here?" Radha stayed silent, eyes downcast, the perfect bait. He walked behind her, again. But this time, Radha had hidden a tiny recording device in her earring. It was live. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I can keep you safe. No one here dares defy me. But you'll have to play along. Radha bit her tongue, then whispered. I'll do whatever you say. Just don't send me to solitary. He smirked. Smart woman. Use your body to survive. Just then, the door burst open. 3 men in plain clothes stormed in, the Special Investigation Unit. Mahipal froze in disbelief. One officer held up the arrest warrant. Another hit play on the recorded footage, just filmed moments ago. Mahipal stood paralyzed, mouth open, no words. His eyes darted like a rat cornered in the dark. Radha turned, removed her earring, peeled back her shawl, revealing the steel glow of her IPS badge. Daraga Mahipal, she said, voice deep like a temple bell. You are under arrest for harassment and abuse of power. And this is only the beginning. The room fell silent. The truth had finally been exposed. Radha watched him get handcuffed, her eyes never leaving him as he was led away. There was no triumph. No revenge. Only a deep silence, like someone watching a lost soul finally enter karmic judgment. And within Radha, a bell tolled. A piece of justice had just been reborn. No one in prison block 4 could have anticipated what happened that afternoon. An officer arrested inside his own office, right in front of a woman he once regarded as worthless. It swept through like a storm across a long muted sky, but after the thunder, not everyone could see the light. Radha stood for a long time in the cold stone hallway, watching Mahipal's silhouette disappear. Not to savor the victory, but to etch into memory the moment when a machine of power was broken by its own arrogance. Yet inside, she felt no relief. One Mahipal was gone, but the system that nurtured him still lived, silent, slippery, and far more dangerous. That night, something strange happened when Radha returned to her cell. For the first time since arriving, someone stood up as she walked in. It was Shanta, the blind woman Radha had spoken with earlier. She didn't say a word. She simply brought her palms together in front of her chest and bowed her head. Then a second woman stood. Then a third. The cell block became a silent ritual, women who had been robbed of their voices now expressing gratitude in the only way they knew how. Radha felt a lump in her throat. She had never imagined that one act could breathe life back into women who had long gone numb, not hope, exactly, but at least a moment of protection. That night, many came to whisper by her side. Years ago, he did the same to my daughter, one woman said, lips trembling. But I had no proof, no one believed me. They threw me in solitary for resisting, another whispered. I was starved for 3 days. These scars, they're from that time. Radha listened to every word like a blade slicing through flesh. Each story was a scar of darkness, not just from Mahipal, but from a system steeped in silence, lies, and cover UPS. She wrote down their names, backgrounds, and identifying details in a small notebook, one that would later become the most crucial evidence to expand the investigation. One night, Shanta returned to sit beside her. She didn't look at Radha, she didn't have to. She could feel her presence. You know, Shanta finally said after a long silence. In my 10 years here, I've never seen anyone like you. Not because you caught him, but because you weren't afraid. Radha gave a faint smile. I was afraid. Many times. I just didn't let it stop me. Shanta nodded gently. Today, you did something only a bodhisattva could do. Not with sermons, but by acting to cleanse karma. Radha looked at her, heart tightening. A woman who had spent a decade in darkness, who had lost her daughter, her sight, could still speak of bodhisattvas. And she, Radha, with all her training, position, and education, had once thought of giving up just because she feared she couldn't win. In that moment, she no longer saw herself as an officer. She was simply a human being, standing before souls that had been forgotten. And she knew, Mahipal was just the beginning. The next day, Radha requested to stay in the prison for 1 more week. Her superiors resisted. She already had the evidence, the mission was complete. But she pleaded, "I need to speak to each of them. I want to understand the truth from its roots." And so, every day, she continued listening. Some women still remained silent. Some were angry. "You people show up once and then vanish. What about us? Who will protect us afterward?" Radha made no promises. But she answered with honest eyes, "I won't leave without doing something for you." Each story peeled back another layer of the truth. Bribes exchanged for prisoner privileges. Interrogations without records. Innocents coerced into confessions. And worst of all, networks of abuse protected from above. Radha knew she was about to touch something even darker than Mahipal. Power and profit, fused like demons. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had the truth. And she had dozens of witnesses ready to testify. On her final night in the prison, Radha stood alone by a small window. The sky outside was black, but somehow the stars shone brighter than ever. As if someone was lighting the way. She brought her hands together, not to chant, not to pray. Just to whisper a vow, for the wounded souls and for herself. "I vow to walk through hell, if hell is where a light is needed." Radha left prison block 4 on a pale afternoon. There was no farewell, no applause. But behind her were dozens of quiet eyes watching. The eyes of women who had been crushed, now believing that someone had come to truly hear them. The car carried her past the gray brick gates, through barbed wire fences that looked like the veins of a sleeping monster. But Radha knew, that monster wasn't dead. It had only changed its skin, retreating into a deeper, darker shadow. Back at police headquarters, stunned faces greeted her. Her superior nodded, though concern clouded his voice. "Do you realize what you've just stirred up, Radha? Mahipal was just a pawn. Behind him is an entire network." "I know," she replied calmly. "And I won't stop." The investigative report was quickly submitted to the state authorities. The evidence, audio recordings, videos, survivor testimonies, were carefully preserved. Soon after, Mahipal's name was splashed across every headline, from niche bulletins to front pages. Prison officer arrested for abusing female inmates. Unraveling a chain of corruption in the correctional system. Public outrage exploded. But Radha soon learned that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it comes quietly. A midnight phone call. A chilling stare from a colleague. A file that suddenly disappears from a drawer. 3 days later, she was told a witness, Meena, had been transferred for unknown reasons. She rushed to confront the new prison warden, but every record had vanished. System error, they claimed. Radha didn't need further explanation. She understood. When the truth is exposed, the shadows will try to strangle it in its cradle. So instead of retreating, she marched straight to the state justice minister's office. The room was large and quiet, so still you could hear the water purifier drip. The minister, once famed for neutral stances, peered over his glasses. "You've done well. But this case, is making a lot of people uncomfortable. Radha met his gaze, unwavering. And what about the women in prison? They've lost their bodies, their dignity. Who gives that back to them? The minister sighed. What do you want? She handed over a list. A full independent investigation into the state's women's prison system. Restoration of lost victim files. Witness and journalist protection. It wouldn't be easy. But he agreed. Because Radha was no longer just a police officer. She had become a symbol of resistance against silence. She began telling her story. Not to everyone, not with noise. But through the few papers that dared to tell the truth. Through journalists who had once been threatened or nearly lost their jobs for asking the right questions. One young reporter cried after hearing Radha's story. Weren't you scared? She asked. Afraid of being silenced? Of revenge? Radha smiled faintly. I was. But once you've heard the cries in the dark, cries that no one answers, you'll know silence is far more terrifying than any threat. As days passed, the case widened. Senior officials were investigated. The hidden ties between prisons, corporations, and politicians began to unravel. But with that came a brutal backlash. One morning, as Radha left her home, she found her tire slashed. A handwritten note in red ink was tucked under the wiper. Who do you think you are? Dig deeper, and you'll bury yourself. She said nothing. Called the tech team. Went to work as usual. But deep inside, she knew. This battle had reached a new level. No longer justice versus a monster. It was now one woman against a cancerous machine. On nights when sleep barely came, Radha would recall the faces in that prison. Shanta, blind yet still speaking of bodhisattvas. Meena, the young girl who whispered her truth after 2 suicide attempts. And she'd ask herself, if I give up now, who will protect them? Who will speak? When they've been silenced for a lifetime. That question, it rang like a bell. Not a bell of victory, but a bell of awakening. And Radha understood. Every right action, no matter how small, is a strike against the walls of darkness. They may not fall today, but they are starting to crack. That night, Radha sat alone on a stone bench outside her office balcony. A soft drizzle fell, each raindrop like a quiet note tapping on the rooftop. The city below was still lit, alive, and moving, but inside her, there was only a hollow space. Because she knew, from this moment on, there was no turning back. She opened her small notebook, a place where she had written not just evidence, but also emotions and reflections she couldn't say aloud. Along the margin of one page, long ago, she had written a single line in purple ink. Right action is not the safest path, it is the correct one, even if it must pass through thorns. She had first heard those words from an old monk in the Dharamsala, whom she had visited after a particularly painful case years ago. At the time, she had asked, "Why does doing the right thing hurt so much?" The monk had simply smiled and replied, "Because the right thing is what few dare to do. Karma is not born from the outcome, but from the intention behind it. If your heart begins with compassion, even if you're slandered or punished, you've planted a luminous seed." Radha looked within herself and saw the truth. She was not a hero. She was a tired, anxious, wounded woman, far more broken than she admitted. But in that brokenness was her humanity. And for that very reason, she could not stop. In the days that followed, Radha didn't just investigate. She listened. She met with the families of victims, people who had long stopped believing their voices mattered. An elderly mother broke down in tears upon learning that her daughter, once imprisoned under false charges, had finally found someone to speak for her. "You're the first person to say my daughter's name with respect," she sobbed. Radha sat quietly beside her, gently holding her trembling hands. "I'm only doing what should have been done long ago." This was no longer just an investigation. It had become a journey of redemption, on behalf of a system that had forgotten its conscience. But along the way, Radha came to a difficult realization. The obsession with revenge was quietly growing inside her. She noticed that every time she exposed another corrupt figure, every time she brought a piece of evidence into the light, she felt a fleeting sense of triumph, followed by emptiness. As though she was no longer fighting for compassion, only to win. And that scared her. One morning, she took a personal day. She traveled to a small temple hidden in the hills, where the silence was so complete you could hear birdsong and the soft whisper of wind chimes. She knelt before a statue of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, not to pray, but to allow her heart to settle. And in that stillness, she heard something, not from outside, but within. Act from love, not from hate. If you let anger lead, you will become what you are trying to fight. Tears slipped down her face, not sobs, just quiet drops, like dew falling from a lotus petal. From that day on, Radha returned with a different energy. She still investigated. She still pushed forward. But she no longer carried the weight of rage. Instead, there was resolve. There was a calm clarity, the gaze of someone who understood. Evil is nothing more than karma unpurified. And justice is the lantern that helps others see themselves again. When her team submitted their final report, a thick file detailing names, incidents, connections, she felt no elation. Only peace. Because now, she knew. She had done her part, with her whole heart. When asked why she risked her entire career to pursue this case, Radha simply smiled and said, "Because there are voices that, if I don't listen to them, may never be heard. And there are wounds that, if no one sees, will rot forever in the dark." If you're still watching this video, and want to give Radha the strength to keep exposing the truth, please comment the number 4 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any part of this journey for justice. Your support allows us to continue making raw and inspiring content, so that no one has to face the darkness alone. No one expected the report Radha submitted to state officials to spark such an explosive chain reaction. The day it aired on national television, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. On screen, headlines scrolled across. Abuse in the women's prison system, shocking truth uncovered by undercover IPS officer. Crimes committed under the name of law, investigators, wardens, and politicians named. Radha did not appear at the press conference. She avoided cameras. She refused any glorification. Because she knew, she didn't do this for fame. She did it because silence, too long ignored, had become a second crime. But the public did not stay silent. Hundreds of thousands took to social media, sharing the story, expressing gratitude, outrage, and grief. They called her the woman who walked into hell to bring justice to the forgotten. Some painted portraits. Some made videos. Some wrote heartfelt letters to the Ministry of Home Affairs demanding reform. And many women who had long stayed silent finally stood up to tell their stories. Within just 10 days, over 37 new cases were sent to the investigation team, each one a fragment of truth buried for years. Radha realized. Truth spreads. When one person dares to speak, 1,000 others find their voice. But because of that, the backlash from old power structures grew more violent. One night, as Radha was driving home, she noticed a car tailing her. She called for a police escort and managed to detour into a safe zone. The pursuer disappeared. No arrests were made. But the next morning, in her mailbox, was a single piece of paper with shaky handwriting. He who sets fire to the forest, will be swallowed by it. Radha smiled. Not with arrogance, but with the calm of someone who knew. The truth no longer lived in her alone. It now lived in the hearts of hundreds. And they wouldn't let it die. She organized a private gathering for the witnesses, no press, no officials. Just the people who had once been forgotten. In a small room lit by warm yellow light, Radha entered and bowed deeply to everyone there. Not as a leader, but as a companion. "I can't change the past," she said. "I can't heal the wounds you carry. But I promise, what happened to you will not be buried again. And if any of you are threatened, I will stand in front." Silence. Then Meena, the girl once secretly transferred, now safe, stood up. She walked to Radha and held her hand. Her eyes were red. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You saved the part of me that once wanted to give up, my belief in humanity." At that moment, no more words were needed. Because something greater than justice was happening. The rebirth of dignity. And Radha understood. The fight wasn't over. But she was no longer alone. The earthquake known as Prison Block 4 didn't just shake the public, it rocked the upper ranks of the state government. Names once protected by suits, badges, and backstage handshakes were now spoken aloud in hearings. For the first time in years, those in power were being forced to answer. The 432-page report submitted by Radha and her investigation team to the Internal Oversight Committee was immediately escalated to the Ministry of Home Affairs. At the top of the blacklist, alongside Mahipal, were names once deemed untouchable. A former Deputy Director of Corrections, a sitting legislator, and most painfully, a former police commissioner who had once been Radha's mentor. The news shook her to her core. Because he wasn't just a superior, he was someone she had once revered. He had taught her her very first lesson in law enforcement. To uphold the law, you must be even cleaner than the law itself. And yet, he was the one who had signed off on transferring disruptive female inmates into solitary confinement, without medical evaluation, without documentation. Each transfer was proof that he knew, and chose silence. Perhaps even collusion. Radha read his name in the report over and over. Her heart felt like it was weighed down by stone. Some pain comes from violence. But some of the deepest pain comes from the collapse of what once felt sacred. She knew she had to bring him into the light. But not with anger. With truth. And without hate. She requested a private conversation, no press, no cameras. Just a quiet meeting room with 2 chairs. He arrived, older, stooped, his hair whiter. But his eyes still held authority. "You've come to judge your teacher?" he asked, his voice low. Radha stayed silent for a moment, then said, "No. I've come to ask, why?" He gave a tired laugh. But in that laugh was exhaustion. "You know, Radha, justice is a beautiful ideal. But ideals don't feed families. They don't protect careers. And when you're standing between idealism and power, most of us choose power." She looked him in the eye. "Then why did you teach me to be honest?" Why did you tell me the law should be guarded even above our lives? He was quiet. Then finally, he whispered. Because I didn't want you to become me. In that moment, Radha understood. He knew he was wrong. He regretted it. But he lacked the courage to redeem himself. She stood, bowed. I won't forgive you. But I don't hate you. I just hope that when you stand before the court, you speak the truth. And for the first time in your life, stop running. He said nothing. But his eyes glistened as she turned and walked away. The day of the hearing, hundreds of citizens gathered outside the state court. Handwritten signs read, "We will not stay silent. Women are not prey." Thank you, Radha, for walking against the wind. The accused were led into the courtroom in heavy silence, a stark contrast to the way they once walked beneath lights and cameras. Radha sat in the front row, not in uniform. She wore a white sari, the color of serenity, not revenge. Because today, she wasn't here to win. She was here to end something. She took the witness stand. Her voice was clear, not trembling, not shouting. Just steady, like deep water. None of us did this for fame. No one wants to lay their pain bare for the world to see. But we cannot stay silent anymore. Not for revenge, but to ensure that what happened to us doesn't happen to someone else. The courtroom fell quiet. The judge bowed his head, then delivered the ruling. We order the formal prosecution of all individuals named in the investigative report, and a comprehensive review of the correctional system across all state women's prisons. Outside, the crowd erupted. But inside Radha, there was only silence. Like the stillness left after pouring a glass of murky water, leaving only the last sediment at the bottom. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel sorrow. Only a release of one more burden. And the quiet knowing. Justice is not an end. It's a beginning. A beginning for a system that now must look inward. A chance for buried lives to rise again in the light. 3 months after the hearing, Radha's name had mostly disappeared from the headlines. The noise of the media gave way to newer stories: an accident, an election, a rising celebrity. As usual, society spun on in its frenzy. But for Radha, the quiet after the storm was more haunting than the storm itself. She sat alone in her small office, staring at new stacks of case files. Some were continuations of the earlier investigation, unresolved arteries in the correctional system. Others were brand new, cries for help from remote corners, from voices that never thought they'd be heard. She was no longer just an officer. She had become a lifeline for exhausted souls. And it weighed on her. One late afternoon, Radha walked into her new superior's office, a soft-spoken man, newly appointed after the system's quake. He was kind, reserved, and wise. "I'm resigning," she said, without hesitation. He looked up, brow furrowing. "Why?" "Because I've reached where I needed to go. The rest of the journey belongs to someone else." He asked no more. Just nodded. "I understand. And I respect it." Radha left the force on a quiet morning. No ceremony. No fanfare. Just some paperwork, books packed into a bag, and an old suitcase. But in her heart, this wasn't an end. It was a return. She went back to a small house on the outskirts, with a vegetable garden, a clear well, and a sala tree she had planted as a cadet. The tree had grown tall, its shade now reaching far. Under it, she placed a wooden bench, where she sat for hours each day. No files. No phone. Just breath. One day, she received a handwritten letter from Meena, the former witness, now out of prison, training to become a nurse at a rehabilitation center. It was short. Just a few lines. Sister Radha, I think of you every day. Not because you saved me, but because of you, I now believe I'm worth saving. I'm no longer afraid of the mirror. I no longer see myself as a mistake. I'm starting to see I'm human. Radha sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. Dusk had fallen. The wind rustled the leaves above her, like silent chanting from the trees. And in that moment, she finally understood something she had never fully grasped in all her years as a police officer. Justice is not just about catching the wicked. It's about helping the good remember they deserve to live, to be loved, and to begin again. That evening, she visited a small temple near her home. Amidst the incense smoke, she didn't pray. She simply whispered in her heart, "May I never grow arrogant for doing what is right. And may I always be humble enough to know the light never came from me alone. It came from every hand that reached out in the dark." A young monk came and sat beside her. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why she was there. He simply looked up at the full moon and said, "You've walked a long journey. But do you know? The light is not the destination. It's what helps us see the road more clearly." Radha smiled. A quiet, genuine smile. She was no longer the undercover IPS officer who stepped into darkness. She was someone who had walked through the dark and brought back light for others. Not with force, but with compassion, free of attachment. There was one thing Radha never expected. That when she stepped back into silence, those who once stood behind her would begin to speak. They weren't heroes. They had no badges, no microphones. They were simply survivors. "I used to be a shadow in prison block 4. Meena's voice echoed on a small podcast called Voices from Where No One Listens. "I couldn't read when I went to prison. I didn't know my rights. I just knew that if someone cried at night, by morning, they'd be taken somewhere, and never come back. Until one woman arrived. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't promise anything. But her eyes, she looked at me like I still had value. She paused, then whispered. After I was released, I chose to study nursing. Not because I wanted to heal others, but because once, someone didn't leave me behind when I felt like there was nothing left worth saving." I used to think she was crazy. Spoken by a young officer who had once worked with Radha on the Special Investigative Task Force. When Radha proposed going undercover into the prison, I thought she was suffering from burnout. Who throws themselves into the lion's den like that? But now I get it. She wasn't crazy. She was brave. And real bravery always scares the faint-hearted. He gave a soft laugh. "I'm sorry I doubted her. And thank you, Radha, for teaching me not to fear doing what's right. I didn't like her." An honest confession from a former colleague, a female officer who once held the same rank as Radha. She was always one step ahead. Always got more recognition. And I was jealous. But when this case came to light, I realized I never had the courage to do what she did. She paused. She made me ashamed of my own silence. But she also made me believe, maybe I still have time to stand tall again. She didn't humiliate me. A deep voice from an anonymous interview, believed to be Mahipal, the man caught red-handed. I thought she'd want revenge. I did something horrible. But she didn't mock me. She just looked straight at me and said, "The truth does not compromise." He sighed. What keeps me up at night isn't the sentence. It's her eyes. Eyes that didn't hate me. But didn't forgive me either. And there were voices from farther away. Ordinary people. People who just saw a news headline or caught a snippet of a video online. But were moved in the deepest parts of their conscience. A middle-aged woman mailed a handwritten letter to the TV station. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. I stayed silent for 15 years. But after seeing Radha, I went to a legal support center. For the first time in my life, I told the truth. A male college student wrote on his personal blog. I used to think women were weak. Then I read about Radha. And I understood, strength isn't in fists. It's in walking into darkness alone. For someone else. Radha never responded to praise. She continued to live simply, as if she were invisible. But she knew, her actions no longer belonged to her alone. They had become a quiet current. Flowing through different lives. Carrying a rare kind of light. The light of awakening. One day, she received a small package. No sender's name. No return address. Inside was a mala, a wooden prayer bead strand made from Bodhi wood. And a handwritten note in brown ink. A person walks through darkness to bring light. That person does not need to be a Buddha. Only, a human. Namo Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Radha held the mala tight. A single tear fell onto her sleeve. Not from sadness. But from the quiet realization, she was no longer alone. Excerpt from an untitled manuscript found in Radha Mishra's desk drawer, handwritten, undated. If someone asked me, what's the scariest part of walking into darkness? I wouldn't answer, the filth, the stifling air, or the evil hiding in shadows. No. The scariest part is when you start to doubt yourself. When every right action is questioned. When your belief in justice is shredded by a rotten reality. When you look in the mirror and wonder, did I change anything at all? Or am I just another piece getting swallowed up? I carried so much anger inside me. Anger at evil. At apathy. At those who turned away when they knew the truth. But then I realized, anger doesn't heal darkness. It just paints everything in a heavier shade of gray. What's needed isn't rage. It's compassion. Not the kind that chants from altars in fragrant smoke. But the kind that acts. The kind that steps into the swamp. Gets dirty. Gets misunderstood. And still chooses to stay. The kind that knows no one is born to be trash. That if someone is dying from being forgotten, then just one person who stays to listen is already the beginning of their rebirth. I don't know how much I've truly changed. Maybe everything I've done will be erased by some official memo 5 years from now. But I'm not afraid. Because I know, I lived my karma with integrity. In the Buddha's teachings, karma isn't just what happens to us. It's how we respond. You are betrayed, that's karma. But you choose to let go or cling to hatred. That's the karma you plant next. I choose to let go. I choose not to hate those I exposed. Because I know they are products of a system. A system I too was once part of. If I hate them, I only make that system stronger. I choose to face it. To speak. And when it was done, I chose silence. Not because I was tired, but because I believe. It's time for others to take the next step. If you're reading this, maybe you're holding something in. A truth left unsaid. A pain you thought you had to bear alone. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I just hope you don't look away. Stay, even just a moment. Listen to a faint voice in the night, to eyes begging for help, to someone too broken to say, I need you. And if you can, speak for them. Because sometimes, just one voice, just one act of kindness, can change someone's whole life. I'm Radha Mishra. I'm no saint. I'm just a woman who chose to walk into darkness. And I carried a lantern. When Radha's story faded from the headlines, many called her a hero, a symbol of justice. But if anyone had asked Radha, what truly kept you from falling, in the face of evil, isolation, and betrayal? Her answer would not have been justice or strength. It would have been faith in karma. In the world of law, guilt is measured in evidence and statutes. But in the Dharma, every action is a seed planted in the mind stream. A glance of disdain, a cruel word, a silence in the face of another's pain. All of them are causes. And their effects may come today, 10 years later, or in another life. But they will come. Radha understood that. That's why she didn't humiliate Mahipal, even though he had defiled her with hands of a demon. Because humiliation does not purify karma. It only adds more mud to a soul already soiled. Instead, she handed him over to the law, and to a deeper law, the law of consequence. Losing his job, being put on trial, that was the outer karma. But the fear that followed him at night, the shame that stared back at him in the mirror, that was the real consequence. And no one could rescue him from that. Amid betrayal by her superiors and isolation within a fractured system, Radha could have chosen to retreat. She could have stayed silent, like so many others. No one would have blamed her. Even if she had lashed out in anger, people would have understood. But Radha chose right action. To act not for fame, not out of vengeance, not to win, but because it was the right thing to do. She entered the prison not to expose anyone, but to seek the truth. She revealed the evil not to retaliate, but to ensure it would never happen again. She turned down every speaking invitation, declined media interviews, because she didn't need roses laid at her feet. In Buddhism, this is called action without attachment. Doing good without tying the heart to outcomes. Because merit isn't born from how much you do, but from the intention behind what you do. The most moving moment in Radha's journey wasn't when she defeated evil, or when she was honored. It was when she sat beneath her sala tree, reading a letter from a survivor, and cried. Not from pity, but from witnessing someone who had brought themselves back to life. The compassion Radha carried wasn't a strained, performative kindness. It was forged through action, sacrifice, blood, and tears. In Buddhism, compassion does not mean leaving evil untouched. It means facing it, without letting it poison your soul. Compassion is seeing that even the wrongdoer is still a human being. Lost, misled. And instead of crushing them, you hand them to the light of truth, so they can face the karma they created. Radha was not immune to anger. She had wanted to burn the system down, to rip the masks off every enabler. But she chose stillness. She chose to pass on light, not just fan the fire of rage. And because of that, the light still remains. One person doing the right thing cannot change the entire world. But one person doing the right thing, when everything else is wrong, can become the anchor that keeps society from being swept away. Radha didn't need to be remembered forever. She only needed one thing: that someone, after hearing her story, would choose to do the right thing tomorrow. There was one morning when Radha woke up. Not because of an alarm. Not because of a schedule. Not because of an urgent call. But simply because sunlight crept through the window slats, casting a glow on the off-white wall where the only picture in her home hung. A pencil sketch, drawn by a former inmate. A woman standing in the night, holding a small lantern. Her face not clearly visible, but the light from her lamp lit the path behind her, where someone else was just beginning to walk forward. Radha sat up, poured a cup of ginger tea, and stepped out beneath the sala tree. Its leaves rustled gently, as if waving hello. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and in that quiet moment, a single question arose in her. Simple, yet deeply challenging. Whose will tomorrow be? Will it belong to the stronger? The louder? The ones with more power? Or to the one who dares to live kindly, even when no one's watching? Tomorrow will belong to the woman quietly working behind a pharmacy counter, once silenced by abuse, now smiling softly at strangers. The student who used to be too scared to speak up, now publishing their first article about injustice in a dormitory. The mother who once sobbed through the night over her beaten son, now walking to the police academy gates to register as a witness. Tomorrow belongs to you. And to me. If we choose not to turn away. Radha doesn't need a statue. She doesn't need her name etched into history books. She needs only one thing: that her actions not be forgotten. Because light doesn't exist to be remembered. Light exists to push away the darkness. Just enough for the next person to see where to step. Whose will tomorrow be? It will belong to those who rekindle the lamp within themselves. Even if it's just a tiny spark. But in the deepest dark, even one spark is enough to begin. And if you're still here, listening through the final moments of this story, please leave a simple dot in the comments. You don't need to say anything more. Just so I know someone out there is carrying the same flame. And if you believe Radha's story deserves to be heard by more people, please share this video. Your action, however small, might be the beginning of another fire somewhere else. Thank you for walking this path all the way to the end. We hope to see you in the next story, where light continues to be told. Namo Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share. What did this story teach you? And how will you carry its message into your life? Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue crafting stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.